Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Journey podcast. It's me, Morgan. Still me. Different week, same person. But we are here today to talk all things parenthood, planning, and also how to have a great partnership with the person that you may decide to have children with, whether you intended to or not. I am joined today by someone who I follow on TikTok, Paige Turner, and she has inspired me many times. Actually, she doesn't know this, but she's inspired me many times to let my partner, you all know who my partner is, Josh, do things. Like sometimes I'm like, I wouldn't do it that way. And I find myself being like, doesn't matter. Let him do it. And also I feel guilty at times sometimes. So like my partner Josh does Langston's bath time routine every day. Like that is his non-negotiable. Like he's like, I want to do bath time. And also sometimes he wakes him up. And so sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel like moms are the ones that like normally do bath time or like normally do like the good morning, like wake up thing. And I like feel guilty that I don't take on that role sometimes. And I hear Paige's voice in the back of my head being like, no, you should let him do the things like, Hey everyone, I'm Morgan DeBaun, a passionate entrepreneur and life advisor. With the Journey podcast, you'll discover that success isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. I'm sharing stories of amazing people who've taken control of their lives. Join me on my own journey to discover the secret sauce behind reaching success with permission from no one else. Anyways, Paige, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background. And of course, you have had an incredible career before you even got into TikTok world. Tell me a little bit about you and how you got started.
Sure. So I've kind of come full circle with content creation because I went to school for broadcast journalism. So maybe it's not surprising. This is where I've ended up. But I spent most of my career in operations roles in startups. So I was in the startup world, specifically e-commerce, overseeing operations of our teams and businesses. And so very different from what I'm doing today on TikTok and Instagram. But, I had been working for 8 or 9 years before I became a parent. And becoming a working parent really radicalized me in a way that I was not anticipating because it just opened my eyes to all of the things, all the systems, all the expectations that we place on women that I maybe knew of in theory, but didn't quite understand what the impact of them looked like on a person. And once I started experiencing that and talking about it in my home with my partner and with my friends, I eventually started to share on social media. And that just happened organically. I was just on TikTok for fun. There was no, I started it because we used it at work. And so I was not looking to be a content creator or to talk about the things that I talk about. It just happened because I was sharing my day-to-day life. And so I like to tell people that I am no expert on this. I walked through it the same way so many other women have, and then dedicated all of my time to figuring out what was going on. I am also a mom to 4 kids. They are all still pretty young. They're all 7 and under. So we're still really in the thick of it. And that in itself is a very full-time job. So
Right. What do you feel like was the moment where people were like, wait, what's going on? I can tell you for me, when you popped up was when you were like, I have all these kids and they're in daycare and this is how much I pay for daycare. And I was like, damn, that's a lot of money. Do you feel like that was your inflection point?
That was, yes. I mean, I had been talking about certain aspects of this for a little bit, but not in that way. And, I went viral-ish for the first time because I said how much I would pay for daycare. But I went a little bit more viral when I shared my response because people were commenting things like, you just need to stay at home with your children. Why be a girl boss when you could be a mother? And all of these things. And I was so frustrated by this expectation that we place on women that at the end of the day, parenting responsibilities are theirs and theirs alone to navigate. The cost of childcare is theirs and theirs alone. And I just don't agree with that. And I shared my perspective on why I think it's important for me to be in the workforce. And, some of that's from my own lived experience. I had a divorced parent and I knew how important it was to be able to financially provide for your children in the case of anything, divorce, death, whatever it might be. I also grew up in the Northeast where like everybody was from a dual income home, right? So like that was just my worldview. But I'm also looking to create a specific life for my kids and for my family. And I thought that was valuable as well. And so that really was the inflection point. That was the moment where this no longer just became fun for me. This became an opportunity to hopefully educate and equip women in particular with the words and tools to articulate what they're going through and to advocate for themselves.
Yeah. So for that woman who's listening to this right now, who maybe doesn't have kids yet and is doing that math and saying, I make $85,000 a year and I live in a city, a
Hmm.
DC, a Virginia, a New York. I'm like, "Oh, sis, I hope you don't live in New York. Maybe in Jersey instead."
Yeah.
Um, how should they go about thinking about the trade-off between pausing their career, going back to work, not going back to work, etc.?
So before I get into it, there's two things I want to say. One, you can pause your career. If that is what you want to do, and you think it is best for yourself and for your family, whether it's for your kids or not even for your kids, just because you don't want to work and be a parent to young children, like that's totally fine. There is power in choosing that.
Mhm.
Um, but what so many women experience is that they don't have a choice to choose. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. But I think what you just said actually leads me to how I think about it, which is I never compare a woman's salary to the cost of childcare ever
Mm.
because it's not hers to pay for. It's not a cost that only she is responsible for. So often in this conversation, women say, I only make 60K. I only make 60K. So how can you expect me to spend $40,000 on childcare? It doesn't make sense for me to work. And I always push back on that. And I say, when you went and got a mortgage for your home, did the mortgage lender only consider your husband's salary? Did he say, sorry, sir, you don't make enough to cover this mortgage? No, it's a joint expense. It's a shared expense, and you both are paying for it. And you're both considered when we think about the cost of a home. That is how we should think about childcare. It is a shared family expense. It is not something that is the burden of a woman to accommodate for. And so
Mhm.
when we do that, when we say, I make 60K and I'll say this, my daycare is $60,000 a year for all four of my
Mhm.
kids, my childcare, not just daycare, but childcare. Say I was comparing those two things. It looks like I'm making nothing, right? But it's ignoring the fact that I'm contributing to my 401k, that I have benefits and social security and all of these things, as well as the lost earnings if I leave the workforce, how much I will lose out on the promotions, the career growth, just the opportunities alone. Because what we know to be true is when women leave the workforce and try to re enter, they're not
Much
offered the
harder.
same salary they had when they left, right? It's like they're
Mhm.
starting from the day they graduated college. And if you're like me, I was getting offered like $28,000 a year, right? So it's very, very difficult. But I think first and foremost, do not look at the cost of childcare as your responsibility alone. It is the
Mm.
responsibility of the family. And it's okay if it's the entire cost of your salary, as long as it makes sense for your family financially and doesn't put obviously a burden on the family. I think it's okay to choose to work, even if it like ends up being zero when you compare yours to childcare, because there are long-term impacts to remaining in the workforce if that is what you want to do.
Mhm. I think a lot of women do want to remain in the workforce, and certainly there's, of course, women who are like, I would love to be a stay-at-home mom, and
Yeah.
that is a job in itself. Childcare is a job. That's why we all
Mhm.
pay for it because it in fact
Mhm.
is labor. But setting that aside for just a second, how do you advise for women to have those conversations with their partner? Because it is an unconventional approach. It isn't necessarily how we were raised. It isn't how society tells us. I mean, I'll even say in my own household, I pay for the nanny. I literally in my mind, I'm like, no, the nanny is helping me. Obviously it's also helping my partner, but I am, especially in the year one of baby life, she's doing washing all my breast pumps parts. She's
Yeah.
washing all these things for the baby, right? If she wasn't doing it, it would have most likely fallen on me. And I think it would have been hard for me to be like, oh, you should pay for this incredibly ridiculously expensive nanny that I just hired. Now I do. Now he does pay for lots of things. But in the beginning, it was hard for me. So I'm curious, what
Mm.
advice would you give for women who are trying to work through how they have that conversation?
I think it goes back to the idea that you two, whether you chose to or not, whether it happened on purpose or not, you two are both parents to this child. And if you're married to this person, I talk a lot about equity in a marriage and how
Mhm.
equity at home really bleeds into equity in all other facets of life, whether that's the workplace or whatever that might be, right? When we don't have equity starting in our homes, it is very difficult for women in particular to fight for equity outside of our homes because there's still this expectation. And the numbers show that women, when they get married, even before children, they have more work each week, more domestic labor, whether that's
Mm.
cooking, cleaning, whatever. Simply by being married to a man, they have more work to do. And when they have children, they do disproportionately more domestic labor and childcare.
Mhm.
But it's so interesting because when we talk about like parenting, men will be like, "Well, I'm the parent too." And it's like, "Well, then like let's start parenting together, okay?" So,
Right.
I think the biggest thing for when I advise people on this is if equity matters to you in your home, if you're not looking to kind of have the trad wife life or whatever that
Mhm.
might look like for you, it's in all facets of parenting, right? Even if you're breastfeeding, your husband can still participate in overnight feedings. You don't have to be doing those things alone. He can be
Mhm.
washing the breast pump parts. That's what my husband did. I would pump, and then when I
Mhm.
when I was feeding the baby, he would be washing the parts, and then
Mm.
that way we could all get back to bed faster.
Mhm.
And it was a team effort. And that doesn't mean he woke up every single time, but he woke up a lot of the times to participate in these things. And the same is true of childcare costs, right? Say you disappear tomorrow, what's he going to do? How is he going to care for this child? He would be paying for a nanny because you doing that childcare for him allows him to have his career and life outside of the home, outside of being a dad. And so we have to recognize that this really is a joint effort. Parenting is a joint effort, but for so long we've placed the burden of the
Mhm.
work. And when I say work, I mean there are so many things that are just like a symptom of parenting, right? Like laundry is a symptom of parenting. It's not
Yes.
parenting. Folding laundry has nothing to do with being a parent. It's
Right.
just a symptom of having children. There's lots and lots of laundry.
Yes.
But so often we equate laundry with parenting. Oh, she's the mom. She does the laundry for the kids. She takes care of the kids. But that snowballs into dishes and school meetings and doctor's appointments, right? And all of these things are just things you have to do that really have
Mhm.
nothing to do with being a good parent. And so I really think in order to kind of have these conversations, you really have to zoom out and think, okay, if we're trying to be equal partners here and to share equitably in this work and this labor and in parenting, that means this is a shared responsibility, shared cost, and shared effort.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, one of the things that you talk through is mental load. Can you
Mm.
explain when you say mental load, what that means to you and how we should all be thinking about it?
For a really long time, I could not articulate it. And so I want to say that. Like, I think so many women experience mental load and they have no idea what it is. And then it drives us bananas and we go crazy and we
Yes.
yell at everybody and we're like, ah! And we lose our minds, right? Because we don't know how to say what mental load is. And so the mental load, I like to think about it as the running checklist in your brain. Everything you need to know, do, and remember, whether it's for yourself or for your home or for your children. So we'll use an example like the holidays. Because I just did this today. It was the second to last day of school before the holiday break. I have
Mm.
gifts for all the teachers, and I have gifts for the bus
Mm.
driver, and I have gifts for all these things. And so for the last 2 months, I've been thinking, okay, I need to pick up gift cards while I'm at Target because it's if you buy them today, it's $10 off or something like that. I need to do that, and then I need to get wrapping paper, and then I need to. They sent me home a list of what kind of candle scents they like, so I'm going to buy them the right kind of candles, and I'm going to remember to bring them with me on Thursday morning. And so it's this running checklist of all the things I need to do to give a gift, right? It looks really simple. I'm handing a gift to a teacher and saying thank you, but a lot of time and effort went into making that
Yes.
happen. And the same thing is true of the diaper bag, right? When you go to the
Mhm.
playground and your child eats all the snacks and goes through 10 diapers because they had a blowout or whatever, it's remembering that when you get home, you need to refill that diaper bag. And not only do you need to refill the diapers, you also need all the snacks and you need wipes and you need all of these things. And so it's this running checklist in your brain of all the things you need to know and do that help you execute your day to day
Mhm.
life. It's remembering which kid likes cheddar cheese versus which likes mozzarella, right? Like your brain is
Yeah.
overwhelmed by all this information. And the thing about this mental load checklist is it never gets shorter. Every time you check something off, you add two more things to it. I did the laundry, but now I need to buy laundry pods. And also, she grew out of her pants. So now I need to buy new
Yes.
pants for my child, right? So it's like I checked off laundry, but now I have to add two more things to my list. And
Right.
that is the mental load. And oftentimes I talk about the mental load of motherhood because, again, this work
Mhm.
often falls to women, but mental load exists in all facets of life. So whether you have children, whether
Yeah, I
you're
agree.
married, there's mental load with work, with friendships, with family relationships. Like who's the friend who's always planning brunch and like texting everybody and like making
Yeah.
sure to call the restaurant? Like that's work. Somebody's doing that and it takes time and effort.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think about the mental load a lot in my role as CEO, where I'm like,
Mm,
nobody else cares about this thing but me. Like, it's our 10-year anniversary. Is this somebody else's job to even remind someone it's our 10-year anniversary? What are we doing for this? And how long
mm,
in advance do I need to be reminding people that in 2 years it'll be our 10-year? And so we need to do this thing, And I literally sometimes I'm just like, literally, I don't think anybody cares. And I've started to recognize the mental load when it's creeping up in my head and just
mm,
choosing to just be like, nobody cares about you, like let it go. So like our
mhm.
Christmas tree, it's not decorated. I still have a pumpkin on my stairs outside my house because
Ah,
I just didn't do like the pumpkin drop off at whatever time it's
yeah.
socially acceptable to take the pumpkin off. That pumpkin might stay there for another couple weeks. Like there's so many things that I've just accepted. Yeah, I didn't clean up my backyard after, the summer. So everything's just crusty and dusty back here. I'm looking at it now. And I'm
Yeah.
just going to be okay with it.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Some of these things we can let go, right? And I think
Mhm.
this is actually a lot of to what you're talking about. Like there's certain things we can let go. Obviously, there's a lot of societal expectations and pressures placed on women to do it all and be it all and to always go
Right.
above and beyond. So it can be very hard because there's also a lot of guilt and
Mhm.
judgment and shame, right? I even think about the
Mhm.
idea that if I dropped off my daughters, I have 3 daughters at school and they looked crazy, somebody would
Yeah.
be judging me. If I didn't
Mhm.
brush their hair, if I didn't do their hair. But if my
Right.
husband did it, they'd be like, "Oh, at least they have pants on." Like that's the difference, right? So there's
Right.
that judgment and shame, but also some of it cannot be dropped, right? Some of it can't
Yeah,
actually
the
fall
doctor's
off the to-do
appointment.
list.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I have a friend who also refers to it as like the open tabs on your computer, right? Like how many you keep them there because you don't want to forget about them. That's also like the mental load. It's like you
Right.
keep that little nugget in your brain because you don't want to forget about it. And uh yeah, it's really difficult and it can be incredibly exhausting.
Mhm.
Another way to think about some of this work is the term cognitive labor. So it's labor, it's
Mhm.
work, but it's just living in your brain. And oftentimes that invisible work we're doing goes really unacknowledged and it's not valued because nobody else sees it. And they
That's
don't they
right.
don't see that checklist.
That's right. So for someone who's listening to this and they're thinking through like, okay, yeah, now you've like put a label on something that like this is what I've been trying to communicate to my partner. Like this is what I've been trying to say is like who's getting the gifts for your parents? What's
Mm.
the thing? Did you make the reservation for the vacations? What about all the flights and the hotels and the times and thinking through all the things? Like how do you start to because I think one of the things I didn't finish my sentence, but like what I'm thinking through is the person who's listening to this who's like, yes, I understand I have a problem. I hear you all. I don't know how to get out of it because it's not the life that I set up for myself. Like I'm already in, I already have the kids. Like I already agreed.
Yeah.
I feel like I already agreed to these things.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know how you feel, but I relate to the idea that I never thought I'd end up here. Right? Like
Mhm.
I was the one who was going to go after my career. Like my husband used to joke. He's like, "I'll be a
Mhm.
stay-at-home dad. Like you go for it, girl." And he
Yeah,
encouraged me always to
that's
go after
awesome.
my career. And I moved to LA without him for 2 years. He's like, "No, do it. You'll regret it if you don't. Like go after what you want and I'll be here." And
Mhm.
so when we had kids, we very much thought like, yeah, Paige is going to have it all. She's going to be a mom to 4 kids, but also have this amazing career. And we still fell into these traps, right? We fell into
Mhm.
these traps because of a couple different things. I like to tell women all the time, this is not an individual failure. You didn't mess up. You didn't pick the wrong partner. This happened because of like a society and system that is set up for this to happen, right? We don't
Yes.
have paid parental leave or not enough for the people who do have it. I only ever got 8 weeks with all 4 of my kids. Like that's all I ever had. All
Ouch.
of that combined is less than what people in other countries get for one child, right? So like I got no time off. My
Mhm.
husband didn't get leave. So he couldn't really participate in the way that I was trying to participate.
Mhm.
Childcare is incredibly expensive. There's the motherhood penalty, right? So all of these things are kind of designed. But then there's also the societal messaging. Like men are told their whole lives, you need to be a protector, you need to be a provider. Like your ultimate job is to put food on the table. And they don't
Mhm.
really think about the fact that being a parent is so much more than a paycheck, right? It's
Yeah.
how you show up in those little moments all day long. And this burden gets placed on women from if you're a birthing parent, and I said I'm also an adoptive mom, right? It happens in all
Mhm.
situations. The second you bring that kid home, Mom, how are they eating? Mom, how many wet diapers do
Yes.
they have? Mom, like mom, all day long. And nobody's asking dad, even though he's sitting right there. And so if you've ended up here, it's not your fault, is what I like to say. There
Mhm.
obviously are sometimes men who are just not great partners, and like that we can't solve for, unfortunately. But I think most men want to be good partners. They want to
Mhm.
be in what they would consider like an equal partnership. They want to be good dads. Like they want to do these things, but they've been conditioned very different than we have. And so I think step one, I always tell women and men is like, first and foremost, you have to have the words to identify what's happening. You have to be able to say, I'm feeling resentful of the fact your life hasn't changed, but mine has. You have to be able
Mm.
to say, I'm drowning in this mental labor that I'm doing and
Mhm.
I need you to do some of it. Without those words, you end up just fighting about stupid stuff like the trash can. You're like, you never take out the trash. And then you just
Right.
scream at each other about the trash. And then it's like, okay, well, none of this has anything to do with the trash, right? We're both like clearly very frustrated about something else.
Yeah.
Um, so having these words to be able to identify what's going on is really
Mhm.
helpful. But then I think my number one tip, like first step to being able to really work through this is making that invisible labor, that mental load visible in whatever way
Mhm.
that works for you and your family. But I would say, like, do this exercise for 2 weeks, a
Mhm.
week, whatever feels doable. Every inside thought you have, put it down on paper. I do it in
Woo.
my reminders app on my iPhone. I'm looking
Mhm.
right now. I have 59 reminders right now.
Woo.
That's my mental load. And it's silly things. It literally is pajama day tomorrow, son's
Yeah.
library day tomorrow. Like it's make a bread bowl for the party we're going. I don't know. Like it's all the things that I need to
Yeah.
do that I can't forget to do. And then there's work stuff, all the stuff. Write it down. Write down all
Mhm.
that invisible labor. Write down the actual labor you're doing that isn't seen. Making kids' lunches, folding
Mhm.
laundry. If you're the person, I work from home, I tend to be the person doing those things during the day, like
Mhm.
in between meetings. My husband could come home every single day at the end of the day and never see any of that happening. And to him, it didn't happen, right?
The
Because
invisible labor is real.
yes. And so an invisible labor doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And like if somebody was standing in front of you, they would see it. It
Mhm.
often means that it's not acknowledged and it's not valued. So the labor is there. If you're the person doing it, you know that it's very, very real. But
Mhm.
oftentimes it can be ignored because one, somebody's benefiting from it without having to do the work and they've never been accountable or responsible to that work and or they don't value that work, right? Like, oh, how hard is it to make lunches every day? And let me tell you, it's something I literally dread doing every single
Effort.
day of my life. I dread it.
It's a lot of effort. Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, even, like, the different stages of baby eating, I'm like,
Oh my
I am the
gosh.
person in our family who is I think cares the most deeply about my son never choking.
Oh my
So, I'm always
biggest
like
fear.
I'm
Biggest fear.
like I was at my mom's house yesterday, and my mom is, like, literally godsend in terms of, like, helping with
Oh,
the
amazing.
load of a child, but she was, like, eating an apple, and she was like, "Here, do you want this apple?" And I was like, "It's a choking hazard. He can't eat an apple." But I was
Yes.
like, "Okay, that was a little maybe an overreaction in tone," but it was just because I was like, "You guys, how many times do I have to say if you can't squish it, he can't eat it, like, he's not
Mm.
past that yet," and I recognized I was, like, watching myself in the moment and was like, "Oh my god, you sound ridiculous, like, you're, like, yelling at your mom about an apple."
But you're not though, because the thing is, again, when we think about this mental labor, this cognitive labor, when we think about research for kids, right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah,
what can
everything.
they eat? What can't they eat? I was doing a lot of research. I had a kid with an egg allergy, and I was really nervous her sister was going to have it. She did. But I was doing all this research about like, oh, how common is it for siblings to have
Yeah,
similar allergies? And like, if
yeah.
I'm worried about it, when should I introduce eggs? And I was going through all this research, and I'm telling my husband, and he's like, oh, she'll be fine. Just give her. And I was like, I'm gonna lose my mind on you. I was like, do you know how much time I'm spending thinking about this?
So
It,
much
but
effort.
that's the case, right? Oftentimes women are expected to be the ones learning about leaps and wake windows and all the
Yes.
things.
Oh,
And we're
yes, I am
supposed
the
to,
nap person.
yes.
I My son had a bottle aversion, which was so
Oh,
terrifying.
brutal.
It was low weight and all these things, so I was like, "No,
Hmm.
I took all these online courses on bottle aversion. I had a bottle aversion book, and then everyone else who was feeding him, I was like, "Okay, but you can't do that. You have to do this." And they're just like, "You're nuts." I'm like, "No, I'm not nuts. I promise you. I have researched this, and we will fix this."
Yeah, I like to call it informed parenting. I used to
Yeah,
jokingly say to my husband, like, you're going through some opinionated parenting choices, and mine are informed at least. I was
that's
like,
right.
so we're going to take the route that actually is rooted in something real other than your gut. Okay. So,
Yes,
like,
yes.
and that's not to say we can't follow our guts, right? And like,
Sure.
as you go through parenting, you might loosen up about certain aspects of it, but like this is a lot of work being the one to know what the choking hazards are, right? Like I didn't
Yeah.
realize popcorn was such a large choking hazard
Mhm.
until I had kids. And now I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 thanks. They don't need popcorn. She's 2.5.
Or
Like, give her
cheese.
give her something else."
Mhm.
Yes, yes, exactly,
Some
exactly.
weird ones. Like, why would we know this? We didn't have kids. Why would we care?
Yeah, we
Like,
didn't. Like, I could chew cheese. I don't need to know about this. Yeah,
why would we
exactly.
know this? You know?
Exactly.
And I think
Yeah,
that's the other thing that I think to myself. I'm like, why would I have known this? Like, of course I have to research this, right?
of
So
course, of
I
course.
think that when it comes to anyone who's listening in, like my point in having Paige here is again, like as always with this podcast and the show is like to help people have the tools to think through intentionality behind their choices. It's
Mm,
not to say you might not intentionally decide to carry the majority of the making these informed decisions and being the person who makes all these choices with childcare and what the doctor they're going to go to and all of the things. Like that's totally fine, but know kind of from your own perspective that you're making that choice and then have a dialogue with your partner on the trade-offs for that choice because
mhm.
I think that resentment that Paige is talking about is like really what breaks up a lot of people over time is like that just slow burn. It's like, wait, everything is fine. And like no one's doing any sort of crazy infidelity or like anything like that. But you could still carry it can break up a lot of people,
Mhm. Yeah, there's
especially
this
working with
book that I recommend to men because it's written by a man and sometimes they're more receptive to that. Not that they should be more
Mhm.
receptive to a man, but sometimes they are. And it's called This Is How Your Marriage Ends. And it
Ooh,
literally, I think as part of it's like, oh, I left a dish in the sink and like that was the final straw. And it's really
yeah.
not about the dish in the sink, right? And it oftentimes I think women often feel resentful or frustrated or even taken advantage of in these situations, right? They feel disrespected by their partner. And
Mhm.
that is a valid feeling to have if this is happening. It doesn't mean your partner's doing it intentionally, but it's okay to feel those
Mhm.
things because that is kind of what's happening, right? Your time is being taken advantage of in a way that your partner's isn't if this is the case. And the best way through it is you have to have these conversations, whether you can have them before kids or after kids or before marriage, after marriage. You have to talk about it because otherwise the resentment will eat you up and you will divorce your husband over the dishes, right?
That's
You
right.
will do that. And it sounds silly, but it's real and it's something that millions of women are dealing with. And so you're definitely not
Yeah.
alone. And I felt really alone in it. So I like to tell people that like the more we talk about it, the less alone we will feel, the more
Yeah.
we will be able to navigate these situations. But for so long, we were kind of just told, like, yeah, this is what motherhood is. Like, deal with it. And I don't think it
Right.
has to be this way.
No. I'm wondering for those who are kind of in your community who are
Mm,
co-parents, where they aren't married,
mm,
maybe because they didn't start off married or whatever
yeah.
it may be in their situation, how do they approach this?
I think it depends on
Yeah.
the relationship, right? Like how cordial it is and how maybe what it looked like before, if there
Mhm.
was ever a real partnership or not. Like I think this can be really tricky. I actually had a woman DM me the other day and she's like, we've come a long way, but man, why do I still have to text my ex-husband an itinerary each week of like what's going on? She's like, he's happy to do everything. He's
Mhm.
always doing it, but I have to tell him what to do. Right.
Mhm.
And so I think it's no different than if you're married to someone. Obviously, like the actual logistics of it might look different, right? If you're married to somebody, you're talking about taking out the trash. If you're not married to somebody and you're living in separate homes, you're talking about making sure your kid's backpack always has what it needs in it and that they're doing their homework or whatever it might be, that they have their sneakers for basketball practice. It's all of those things. But I do think, again, if it's a cordial enough relationship where you can have these conversations, I like to recommend a couple different tools you can use, which
Mhm.
is there's the fair play method, and a book by Eve Rodsky called Fair Play, and she has this game that I don't think is perfect, but I think it's a really great starting place, which is like you can list every single task associated with maybe parenting your children and co-parenting with somebody. And then you each take ownership of these things and you have
Mm.
visibility. And it's very similar to putting the mental load down on paper, like throw that in there too. And talk through all of these things and see, are we doing this in a way that feels fair? Am I doing too much? Are you doing too little? What's going on? It's a good starting point to be able to
Mhm.
look like on paper and say, okay, who's doing what? And is it fair? Then there's other things you can use. There's a ton of apps for
Yeah.
all of this stuff, and actually think it's really important for co-parents to have these tools, whether it's a shared calendar or a shared to-do list of things the kids need with due dates. So
Mhm.
if you have the kids that day, then you know it's on you, and if you can assign an owner to those tasks, I think that is all like a really valid way to explore these things. I think all of this has to be rooted though with like I like to say this to everybody, married, not married, there has to be good intent behind all of this, right? There has to be a willingness to participate, and there has to be a desire for everybody to be happy and thriving, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't want to place undue burden on somebody else, or hopefully we don't want to do that. And if that's the case, then let's have these conversations in a way that makes everybody feel supported. And then we can all hopefully thrive in whatever situation we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, just switching gears a little bit to kind of popular culture a little bit.
Mm.
There's been this resurgence and back and forth on trad wives.
Yeah.
There's incredible women who are showcasing their homesteads, making things from scratch that
Hmm.
are on farms, milking
Hmm.
cows with their 7 children. You guys know who I'm talking about. And if you don't, then God bless you
You'll
because you're
just
not
Google
adult.
it. All you have to
Yeah.
do is Google that and you'll find her.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, like, do you feel like it's changing people's perspectives or like making the work that you're talking about like more difficult for people to process or not really?
I think about it in a couple different lenses. I think one, a lot of it is a bit of propaganda, right? It's like this like idealized version of like what it used to be like, right? Like what it used to be. And like going back to that, right? But like I'm sorry, I don't want to chase chickens around. I don't want to milk a cow. Like I like picking that up at a grocery store. And so like you're not going to convince me that that's like a better life. I know how hard that is. So there's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
some of this is like we joke like the Instagram of it all, right? It's beautiful. It looks amazing. But the actual reality of it is probably pretty difficult to navigate. And
Hmm.
so, but what I think it is I think it's a direct response to like, we had the end of the girl boss era, right?
Hmm.
And then we like moved into this world where it's like, you're still going to have a job, but it's okay to still be a mom. And it's
Hmm.
okay to like prioritize things outside of work. But what's happened is women in particular are so burnt out because they are doing the bulk of the childcare and they're doing the bulk of the domestic labor and they're working their asses off and they're
Hmm.
earning more money than their husband, but like somehow still doing more laundry than him. And women are drowning and they're saying, I can't do this, right? I can't fight against the fact that I don't have affordable childcare. I can't fight against the fact that I keep getting passed up at work simply because I'm a mom. I don't want to fight this fight anymore. So I'm just going to leave the workforce.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna be a trad wife. I'm gonna be at home and life will be simpler. And what I will say is I am a mom who got laid off 8 weeks ago.
Hmm.
And
I'm sorry.
thank you. It was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, but I have found that my days are just as busy and hectic and crazy as they were when I
I
had a
know
corporate
that's right.
job. They just look different. They just look
Hmm.
different, but all of the same systemic issues are still there, right? And I think about stay at home moms, the average stay at home mom, not a privileged mom who is married to a JetBlue heir, right? Like an average mom does
Hmm.
not have the funds to pay for supports. She doesn't have the funds to pay for childcare so she can go to a doctor's appointment when she needs to go to the doctor's. She doesn't have the opportunity to have her husband call out of work when her kids are sick. So she's taking care of her sick kids when she's sick, right? Like all of those things still exist. It is still incredibly exhausting. It is still a ton of work. It is still hard. Like all of the things are
Hmm.
still there. You just no longer have a boss that you have to request PTO from. And
Hmm.
I think that's the thing. It's like I think we've ignored a lot of the realities of what being a stay-at-home mom looks like. And any stay-at-home mom will tell you, like, this is no cakewalk. And so there's that, but also when we look at trad wives, again, I want to talk about that privilege. Like the ones that people love to look at on social media are incredibly wealthy, incredibly
Yep.
privileged.
Yep.
And most of us are not that way. It's very difficult to live on a single income in this country currently, which is why most people don't do that, right? And
Hmm.
so there's that part, but it ignores the financial risk that it poses to women, right? One of the biggest indicators that a woman will have like financial trouble in the future is that she has children. Like simply the fact that she has children puts her at greater risk of financial trouble in the future. Whether it's divorce or death or your partner becomes disabled or sick, whatever it is, you're now in a position where you're not able to provide for yourself or to leave a marriage if you want to. You don't have a retirement.
Hmm.
There's this actual thing that women have to retire later because when they take time off to care for their children, they don't put into their retirement funds and therefore they can't retire when their partners retire. And there's more women, elderly women who live in poverty because of things like this. And so
Hmm.
when we just say, just leave the workforce, even just for 5 years, 10 years, you can go back. It's really not that simple. It has really long term implications on women. And I think the trad wife thing, it's like it looks so beautiful and it looks like a response to what we're all dealing with and the struggles we have. When in reality, I think the real response is systems and infrastructure and funding and
Yeah.
supports in our country that would allow us all to thrive. The problem is those are just much harder
To get done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, we're certainly not closer today than we were potentially 3
Unfortunately,
months ago.
no. No, we're
Yeah, I mean,
farther away. Yeah.
much further away. I think the other thing from, like, when I look at those women and I say, "Oh, man, to make a Cinnabon from scratch," like, I just think it's interesting. I think it's inspiring to say, okay, how I look at it is like, "Oh, I don't think about how some of the things that I consume are made."
Mhm.
And when I think about my child and what he's putting into his body and all of the chemicals and all these recalls that we've had recently, which is
Oh my
just
gosh.
also exhausting. So I'm like,
Mhm.
how are organic cucumbers getting recalled? Like
I
they're
know.
supposed to be organic.
Mhm.
So what am I paying for? Like it's infuriating. So I'm like, shit,
Yeah.
should I just build the cucumbers in my backyard? Like,
Yeah.
so I take it as like, okay, let me join the community CSA. Like, I'm not going to pick the cucumbers in the backyard, but I can pay the guy who picked the cucumbers in the backyard
Mhm.
because I live in Tennessee. So thinking about how do I take inspiration from some of those choices
Yeah.
and say like, okay, let me bring that into my life. But I think what's really hard is for people who want to be in the workforce and do want to have it all. Like they do want to have the beautiful home and host people for the holidays. They do want to have the kids
Yeah.
and they do want to experience all of the things. It's the overwhelming pressure of the perfection. Like it's
Mm.
the overwhelming pressure of like, oh, like this is what this is supposed to look like because of how social media has portrayed it. And I think for other generations, they didn't see those images. Like they only saw make themselves, their mother, their aunts, families, maybe their church or their faith life. Like that was like all they were exposed to.
Right.
And now we see everything.
And there's like pushback on everything you do, right? I could say, like, I made this from scratch, and somebody's like, well, you used the wrong flour. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Like, you can't really do anything right on social
Yeah.
media, to be honest. Like, no matter what you do, somebody has something to say, or a different
Yeah.
opinion, or a different lived experience, right? Um, One man said on a recent video of mine, well, men pay for everything, so women should do all the labor. And I was like, well, actually, only 18% of households are single income households. And in some of those, it's women earning the single income, right? So
Period.
no, not every man is paying for everything because that's just not the reality of our world.
Yeah.
And more women are breadwinners now. 41% of homes have breadwinners that are women. And
Hmm.
so the tides have turned on that part, right? But our world views are shaped by what we've personally experienced. So when I said, like, I grew up in the Northeast,
Hmm.
every woman I knew, every mom I knew went to college. Every mom I knew had a job. Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you
That was
one
your world.
friend. Yeah, I couldn't tell you one friend was a stay-at-home mom. Couldn't tell you one because I
Mm.
didn't know anybody who had a stay-at-home mom. Like, I thought that was a thing of sitcoms. I was like, that is fake. That's not real. Right? And none of my grandparents were stay-at-home moms. Like, nope.
Right.
Everybody was always working. Like, that is just the world I lived in. And so I could have gone through my life never knowing anything different because that's
Yeah.
what I experience and still experience in my own community now. Like, all of my friends are
Mm.
working moms. And
Mhm.
so social media has just expanded our worldview in amazing ways, but it's also this information overload and pressure. I even think about, like, I don't know if you've ever done this, but like sometimes I scroll my husband's Instagram and I'm like,
Oh,
why
I
is your,
love doing
yeah,
that.
but I'm like, his whole Instagram, my husband's also like a blue collar handy guy. It's like woodworking videos. I'm like,
Yeah.
like it's all woodworking. And mine is like, this is the best sleep sack and this is the best way to feed your child. And have you like done X, Y, and Z sensory activity? And I'm like, no, I haven't.
No, I
And
haven't.
it like it knows I'm a mom. Like, it knows
Yeah.
because I liked one video or said the word
Yes.
mom, and the algorithm was like, "Whoa, she needs every expert in her
Right.
feed today." And I think that's the difference too for moms is that we get that messaging all day long.
I'm getting messaged the second kid narrative now. Like, I'm
Oh, are
getting message to
you?
like yeah, and I caught it, like, I was, like, scrolling, I was like, "Why am I getting all these videos of, like, 2 under 2 or this woman who's got 3
Wild.
under 4 and, oh, should I have the second kid or not?" I was like, "I have not searched this at all, so you guys are just tracking the age, like,
Probably.
based off of, like, the, breastfeeding and the food and da, 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 like, you're
Mhm.
tracking, like, what stage and women who are in this stage." That is so unfair, TikTok.
It is. Yeah. Well, it's also probably like, "Oh, she watched this whole video." So she's
And I
definitely
did.
interested.
I
Yeah, and
did
she
watch
she
the
wa
whole
she wants
video.
it. Yeah, they're like, "She watched this whole thing, which means she wants to see more of this, so she's gonna get all the 2 under 2 content."
No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't make that content because 2 under 2 is really hard. But,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, it is so interesting because what we see is so specific to us and our lived experiences,
Yeah.
but again, tied back to those expectations. Our husbands
That's
aren't
right.
seeing that content. They're just not
No,
getting
not
that.
at all. He's not thinking about it at all.
No.
So, switching gears to this kind of, like, new political climate that we're entering,
Mm.
we're not entering into a political climate that is favoring, let's say, equitable pay and equitable rights for women, but we
Mhm.
are weirdly entering in a society where people do value the traditional family.
Mhm.
And so there's like this weird complex of being like traditional family, like, supporting families. We're doing this for families and the American family. And yet, when you look at the policies and the implications of those things that they're proposing, it's literally the opposite of things
Yeah.
that will actually impact the American family. How do you feel like we should all be advocating for ourselves? And I mean, I watched you during the election. I thought you did a good job of like balancing informing with, sharing your own opinion versus just like, this is the information. You guys should be aware of this. How do you
Mm.
feel like we should be doing that in kind of these next 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I love social media is because I actually do think it can be a tool for change and for
Mhm.
even if you only impact one person's ideology with what you share, I think that is still impactful. And so, but I think at the end of the day, it's the conversations we're having with people in our lives, right? I have to have conversations with my own mother and be like, "Do you know how much daycare costs? Like, do you
No, our
understand?"
mothers have no idea.
I'm like, "Do you understand, like, the lack of paid leave?" Like, all these things, right? Like, having these
Yeah.
conversations and saying, like, "When you vote for this person or this policy, like, that's putting me in a really difficult position," right? Or
Mm.
even things like the Department of Education as parents, I think a lot of
Mhm.
us care about education for our kids. I have 3 kids who are in special education programs for
Mhm.
different things. Like one's in speech therapy. She has an IEP. If the Department of
Mhm.
Education goes away, she might no longer have access to that, which would mean
Mm-mm.
I then have to pay out of pocket, which I already do for other speech therapy for her. But I would have to pay for additional out of pocket speech therapy. It's $45 a session. I'd be
Wow.
spending over $100 a week just to get her speech therapy that she gets for free right now through the state and through government funding. And so a lot of people don't realize this, right? A lot of people are like, they're
Mm.
for the family. They want us to be able to buy groceries, but they don't realize like all the other implications of what's about to happen because it's hard to stay on top of. I can't stay on top of all of these things, which is why I'm trying to consume as much information as I can. And so
Mhm.
I think having these conversations in your life, they're kind of weird and hard to have because we've been told our whole lives not to talk about politics, but like I actually think we need to talk about politics and doing so from a place as much as possible from like the human side of things, right? Which is like,
Mm.
yes, I'm also pro family. And you know what I want? Like, I want your child to have free lunch in school. I do. I just want your kid to be
I
able
do
to
too.
eat.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
like if you forget to pack your kid lunch, I want you to know that they're going to have lunch in school. And
That's
they're not
right.
going to be ashamed for it or like any of those things. And I want us to think about the human side of these things. I had a woman reach out to me because I talk a lot about daycare. And she's like, "You're going to get this Paige. I pay so much money for childcare, similar to you. And there's this family that goes here and they're here on a voucher. And how
Mm.
unfair is that?" And I was like, "That's weird that you think it's unfair that a child has access to safe and affordable childcare. Like, it's not their fault that it's expensive for you. It's not, right? And that is not them getting that free voucher spot did not make your spot more expensive. That's not what happened. And so I think we all have to just do our best to step out of side of just like our issues and look at the people
Mm.
around us and say, that little boy deserves the same care that my little boy has. There's no reason he shouldn't. Like, he's a child, and I shouldn't be able to afford this daycare simply because of my privileges. And this child has to go to an unsafe, maybe not even accredited daycare, right? Because his parents
Mhm.
can't afford it. And so I like to have those conversations. And she and I had that conversation. Luckily, she was very receptive to it. But I think we can all be stuck in our worldview and say, like, whoa, this is happening to me. I'm spending $60,000 a year on childcare. This is unfair. I can afford it. Like, it sucks, but I can afford it. There's a person sitting next to me who can't afford it, and they're choosing options that aren't safe, and I wouldn't want for any child, right? And so I'm not advocating just for me. I'm also advocating for those people. And I think that's what we have to do in this political system is look at these policies and not just how they impact one person, but
Mm.
everybody, right? How does this impact all of us? And specifically these things about mothers and kids. I mean, what happens with our kids, what happens with mothers, it's ultimately an economic issue.
Yeah.
And like we need to think about it that way as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's also like it could be you at any given moment. Like this
Any day.
idea that we're all safe is just not the case. I mean, we see it with the
Mhm.
school shootings and everything. It's like There's no rhyme to this reason. Like it is literally, I don't care, private, public, 5 years old, 20 years old.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So like if we don't all start to say, literally, my neighbor's child is my own, like
Hmm.
if we don't do that, then we are the ones that are going to have the consequences. It's not the politicians, it's us, the normal
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, and I think, I'm talking to you as a privileged white woman living in the suburbs of Massachusetts, right? And like,
Mhm.
I don't know if you talked to me in my 20s, I'd have this worldview, right? And I credit that, some of that to like social media and being able to like
Yeah.
learn and grow and evolve. But I think to your point, like gun violence, for example, is something that I think we all agree on. Like I think 60% of people in a poll said that they wanted to ban assault weapons
Mhm.
because of this issue, right? But our politicians aren't having. I went to DC just a few weeks ago to lobby on this, and the politicians don't
They
care.
don't care.
They don't care because that's not where their money's coming from, and for them, it's not really about that, right? And so we have to view that. We have to understand that, and we also have to acknowledge our privilege in these conversations, which is like I don't have any. None of us have privilege in this gun violence conversation. Like there is no privilege. There's no way to
There is
protect your
none.
children. You can keep them home from school, but if you can walk into a grocery store, it can happen anywhere. Honestly, it can
Yep.
happen anywhere. And so, like, there's certain areas where we don't have privilege, but when we do have privilege, I do think it is our responsibility to acknowledge those who don't. The
Mhm.
Maha movement in particular. I had people in my DMs after the election saying, like, "Well, don't you want our kids to have safe food?" And I said, "Yes, but not at the expense of other kids. Not
That's right.
I can bake my own bread. I can, to your point, I can grow my own tomatoes if I want to. Like I can actually do those things. I cannot protect your child from gun violence. I can't. There's
Nope.
nothing any of us can do. You can't protect my oldest son is a black boy. I'm like, you can't protect
Mhm.
him from police brutality in the future. You can't
Mm.
because you're voting against that actively. And so I don't have a choice on that. You have a choice. You can make your own cucumbers and your own bread, but I can't choose a different world for this kid. And
Mhm.
so I try to have that perspective and I try to hear that perspective from other people as well and to like
Mhm.
understand that. But I think as much as we can do that, I do think we're all probably closer than we think on a lot of these topics.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the more that we all talk to each other and have these conversations and humanize the actual, what are we really talking about? Like
Hmm.
the Department of Education sounds like a big thing. It's like, I don't know, the Department of Education, I don't know what it does. Or like,
Yeah,
it's like, well, actually, let's
does a
really
lot.
talk about it.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
really talk about it,
yeah.
and these are the children, the people that are going to grow up to be the people who you are operating with, that are driving the cars next to you on the highway, that are in the grocery stores with you, that are in the movie theater with you watching Wicked. Like you can't just segment yourself in a little bubble,
Mm-mm.
So for anyone who's listening to this, I know that for a lot of us, we have went through the election. We're kind of like, it's done, it's out of our hands. Like it's going to be what it's going to be. They're going to fuck around and find out. But like, we can't have that mentality of like,
No,
they are going to fuck around and find out. Like, we are also going to find out. So we have
unfortunately,
to
yeah.
stay engaged, unfortunately for all of us. But we have to stay engaged. And I think when I think about, there's a lot of other issues when I think about being a mother and being a parent and being a working person who cares deeply about my community. Part of it is staying engaged. So,
Hmm.
um, anywho, you guys know I could go on and on. Paige, thank you for joining us today. Where can folks find you and connect with you?
Sure. I am on all social media as long as it exists and is not banned at She is a Paige Turner. You can also find my Substack at She is a Paige Turner on Substack. I have a newsletter where I talk about these things in depth weekly. But yeah, otherwise, you'll find me everywhere online.
Amazing. Paige, thanks for joining us today. And you all, I'll see you next week right here back on the Journey Podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Journey Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review and head to our Instagram and YouTube to leave a comment. I look forward to hearing how this podcast has made an impact on your own journey.